The bell tolled once, and the stained-glass throne room shuddered as a hidden door blew open behind the dais. Princess Elara said, "The wind knows a name I have forgotten." A whisper curled through frost, brushing her ear like a blade. Prince Adrian said, "Step back, the dark is listening." The torchlight flared blue, and tapestries showed knights kneeling to no one. Master Rowan said, "When the kingdom inhales, walls breathe secrets." A sword slipped from a niche and hit stone, ringing like a warning. Mira said, "That sound was waiting for us." The cold voice returned, threading every corner. The voice said, "Child of the moon, you were promised to the grave." Elara gripped the fallen blade and felt it hate her pulse. Lord Varen said, "We should retreat and seal the breach." The bell tolled twice, and the floor answered like a drum. Shadows knit themselves into a crown and drifted toward her throat. Elara said, "If this is doom, then say it to my face." A silver stag shimmered in the doorway, antlers star-bright. Master Rowan said, "Guardian, speak or strike." The stag's eyes held storms. The voice said, "The curse breaks only when blood remembers blood." Adrian caught Elara's wrist as the wind tugged her forward. Mira said, "We are not ready, but we are here." The bell tolled thrice, and the knight stepped inside. Dawn bled gray across the ramparts as the wind carried ash from distant villages, and Elara counted the quiet as if it was soldiers. Prince Adrian said, "The curse is marching faster than rumors." Master Rowan traced frost on the parapet and watched it melt without sunlight. Master Rowan said, "Curses eat warmth before they eat walls." Mira leaned against a crenelle and studied the road where no traders came. Mira said, "The market bells have been silent for a week." Lord Varen smoothed a sealed letter and offered it to Elara like a favor. Lord Varen said, "The council wants a display of strength." The words felt like a chain laid over a drowning throat. Elara said, "Strength is not noise, it is shelter." A raven circled once and vanished into pale cloud as the stag's tracks ended at the gate. Adrian said, "If the guardian will not speak, we must." Rowan's staff tapped stone like a clock running out. Elara said, "Then we gather what courage is left and make it louder than fear." The horizon shivered, and the ash kept falling. In the library that smelled of smoke and lavender, Elara opened a cracked codex and found a moon sigil pressed like a bruise. Master Rowan said, "Your line once bargained with night to save harvests." The pages whispered when she turned them, and margins carried warnings in a steady hand. Elara said, "If my name was the price, who paid the rest?" The hearth refused to catch, and the cold sat in the chairs like guests. Prince Adrian said, "We will not let words decide your breath." Lord Varen hovered near the shelves with pleasant eyes that did not blink enough. Lord Varen said, "Prophecy is a negotiation, not a verdict." Mira stacked maps and kept a dagger under the top copy. Mira said, "Negotiations break when someone lies." Rowan closed the codex and pressed his palm to the cover until the sigil dimmed. Rowan said, "Secrets keep you alive until they kill you." Elara felt a thread pull tight behind her heart, and the room listened. They met the silver stag in the courtyard, where frost etched every flagstone and breath rose like prayers. Alien's gaze weighed them without malice. Alien said, "Oaths are louder than bells." Elara stepped closer, and the sigil at her wrist warmed. Elara said, "Tell me how to break what breaks us." The stag turned toward the shattered gate, and the wind bowed. Alien said, "Remember the blood you were taught to forget." Prince Adrian planted his feet beside her as if setting a standard. And Adrian said, "We stand with her, even against her past." Master Rowan lowered his head and hid sorrow like a jewel. Rowan said, "Truth costs, and the first coin is comfort." Mira brushed frost from Elara's sleeve and grinned at fear. Mira said, "We will pay together, not alone." The courtyard echoed, and somewhere a harp string snapped in an empty room. As dusk pressed violet against the windows, the council chamber filled with empty chairs and too many flags. Lord Varen said, fear can be guided like a river if the banks are firm. Elara felt the room tilt towards spectacle and away from mercy. Elara said, "We will not parade hunger to soothe panic." Master Rowan watched dust spin in the lantern beams like small planets. Rowan said, "Authority that forgets bread remembers ruin." Prince Adrian stood behind Elara's chair and laid a hand on it, anchoring her to the floor. Adrian said, "Command begins with protection, not display." The bell rope twitched, though no wind lived here. Mira said, "Something is listening to us, listen." The flag stirred, and then drooped, as if ashamed. Elara said, "We face the curse at dawn, not with trumpets, but with doors open and fires lit." The chamber exhaled, and the darkness waited just beyond the threshold. The rain drummed across the castle roof, as Elara traced cracks in her chamber wall, each line feeling like a story she had forgotten. Elara said, "Every stone knows my name, but I do not." Master Rowan entered quietly, carrying a candle that bent shadows long and sharp. Rowan said, "Your family hid you from truth, believing silence could shield destiny." She opened her palm, and the sigil glowed faintly, as if answering. Elara said, "If silence protected me, why does the curse grow louder each day?" Rowan's eyes flickered toward the storm outside, and his lips pressed into a thin line. Rowan said, "Because the curse remembers blood, even when hearts try to forget." Thunder rolled, shaking the shutters until they rattled like chains in a dungeon. Prince Adrian stood at the doorway, his sword unsheathed, watching the night as if it were an enemy. Adrian said, "No blade can cut whispers, yet I will guard you from them." Elara's throat ached, carrying both fear and longing, while the storm painted sorrow on every wall. Morning light fractured through stained glass as Rowan unrolled an ancient scroll across the council table. Rowan said, "The prophecy was never a tale, it was a debt." The words crawled across parchment like living things, curling with silver ink. Elara touched a line that burned warm against her finger. Elara said, "It speaks of the moon's daughter offered to the grave." Her breath caught as the sigil on her wrist pulsed harder. Rowan's face creased with sorrow deeper than age. Rowan said, "Blood was promised to bind harvests, and it was your cradle that sealed the pact." Adrian slammed his fist on the wood, rattling goblets. Adrian said, "Then destiny is theft, not truth." Mira leaned over the map, jaw tight, knuckles pale against the table edge. Mira said, "If fate wants her chained, it will have to fight us first." The chamber filled with silence heavier than stone. Far beyond the market square, smoke curled from abandoned chimneys as villagers watched from shadows. Lord Varin stood with hands behind his back, gaze fixed on the distant castle spire. Varin said, "Darkness rises not with shouts but with patience." His voice was low, almost tender, though eyes hardened like steel. A raven descended, landing on his arm as if answering a command. The bird's beak opened, and a faint whisper slid into the air. Varin said, "They still believe courage is enough to mend rot." The market stalls sagged under mildew and forgotten goods. He pressed the raven's feather against his palm until it bled. Varin said, "When they beg for hope, it will be my hand they take." The clouds drifted lower, and the sky seemed too heavy for the earth. At twilight by the castle fountain, Elara leaned close to Adrian, water rippling with reflected fire from nearby torches. Elara said, "Every path feels stolen from me." Her words trembled like the surface of the pool. Adrian brushed her hand gently but did not hold it. Adrian said, "Then I will carve a path that is only yours." His eyes glowed with conviction, though fear lingered at their edge. Elara looked away, seeing only her reflection fracture in the water. Elara said, "If prophecy rules me, what remains for us?" Adrian's jaw tightened, yet his voice softened. Adrian said, "I will stand between you and every prophecy, even if it cuts me to pieces." The fountain's water stilled as if listening, and the torches hissed louder. The dusk closed around them, keeping their words as secrets. The training yard smelled of iron and frost, as Mira tied leather bracers around her arms, eyes locked on Elara. Mira said, "You will not stand alone, not while I breathe." Elara raised a wooden blade, shoulders stiff from hesitation. Elara said, "I fear my strength will never match what is demanded." Mira lunged with swift precision, wooden blade clashing, sparks of will instead of steel. Mira said, "Strength is not measured by ease, but by refusal to yield." Elara pushed back, breath ragged but steadier, finding rhythm in the strike. Adrian watched from the edge, silent, but ready to intervene. Rowan leaned against the archway, gaze shadowed, staff planted like a witness. The thuds of practice echoed like war drums, carrying their vow into the night. The forest's breath turned sharp as Elara and her companions entered, mist crawling like veins between roots. Elara said, "Every tree leans closer, as if listening for my fear." Mira's dagger traced idle patterns in the air, her eyes scanning shadows. Mira said, "Fear feeds what lurks unseen, hold steady." From the dark, a shape slithered, scales glinting with sickly green under fractured moonlight. Prince Adrian raised his blade, the edge reflecting white fire. Adrian said, "Stand behind me, shadows will not have you tonight." The creature hissed, forming a mouth that smiled without warmth. The voice said, "Daughter of the moon, your blood opens the way." Master Rowan thrust his staff forward, runes pulsing like heartbeats. Rowan said, "Be gone, this forest is not yours to claim." The ground trembled, and branches arched like claws. Elara stepped forward, chest burning as the sigil at her wrist flared brighter than before. Elara said, "If you know my blood, then know it will resist you." The creature faltered, recoiling, and the mist grew colder. At camp, the fire's embers struggled against the suffocating night as a cloaked figure stepped from the dark. The stranger's smile carried confidence too polished for trust. The figure said, "I offer safe passage through lands cursed to devour you." Elara hesitated, her gaze sharp as she clutched her cloak tighter. Elara said, "And what told you ask for such mercy?" The stranger lowered his hood, revealing sharp eyes and a scar twisting across his cheek. The man said, "Call me Kaelin, ally of your cause, though few know it yet." Adrian's hand tightened on his sword hilt, suspicion etched on his jaw. Adrian said, "No true ally hides behind riddles and scars." Mira glanced between them, unsure, while Rowan's gaze narrowed with silent recognition. Rowan said, "Some allies are masks, not men." Kaelin only smiled, as if words of distrust amused him more than angered him. The fire popped, throwing sparks like omens into the tense silence. By the riverbank, Rowan stood apart, gazing at the stars as if searching for answers written in silence. Rowan said, "Truth can wound deeper than swords, and sometimes mercy lies in withholding." Elara approached, her voice carrying quiet frustration. Elara said, "You keep secrets as if they shield me, yet they bind me heavier than chains." Rowan's eyes softened, the old grief rising behind them like smoke. Rowan said, "If I tell you all, the weight may break you before the curse does." Adrian listened from the shadows, his jaw tight, unwilling to intrude. Adrian said, "She deserves the truth, even if it burns her." Rowan closed his eyes, staff pressing into the soil, runes dimming. Rowan said, "A past soaked in blood cannot be softened by words." Elara stepped closer, determination shaking her voice. Elara said, "I will not be broken by silence, but by betrayal." The river carried their reflections like ghosts, trembling with current. In the lower villages, famine's stench clung to every shuttered house, as hollow-eyed children watched from behind broken doors. Elara's chest tightened as she walked the dirt street, each gaze a question she could not answer. Elara said, "The kingdom's hunger is louder than prophecy." Mira pushed a crust of bread into a child's hand, her jaw trembling. Mira said, "If the curse devours crops, then we will share what is left, even if it is nothing." Adrian scanned rooftops, one hand near his blade, distrust in every glance. Adrian said, Desperation can turn friend into foe faster than steel. A villager spat at the ground, words sharp as knives. The man said, "Where was the crown when our fields turned to ash?" Elara lifted her chin, though guilt pressed her lower. Elara said, "I will not let your voices drown in silence again." The silence that followed was thick with doubt and grief. Night fell heavy as Elara stood at the edge of the campfire, her hand trembling on the blade hilt. Elara said, "Every step closer feels like walking into chains." Adrian placed himself beside her, voice iron. Adrian said, "Chains break easier with two hands pulling." Mira leaned against a log, eyes softer but steady. Mira said, "We have chosen your fight as ours." Rowan's silence lingered longer, eyes shadowed with burden. Rowan said, "Destiny never waits for readiness, only for courage." Kalen approached from the fire's glow, smirk carved across his face. Kalen said, "If courage is scarce, deception fills the gap." The group turned, tension crackling, suspicion a blade of its own. Elara raised her chin, her fear knotted with resolve. Elara said, "Then we walk forward, even if the road betrays us." The fire popped, sparks climbing like fragile stars into the uncaring dark. The fire crackled in the ruined chapel as Kalen stood revealed, cloak discarded like a shed skin. Elara's chest tightened as betrayal turned the airs sour. Kalen said, "You mistook my guidance for loyalty, but my oath was never yours." Adrian's blade rose in an instant, fury flashing. Adrian said, "You dined at our fire, yet you fed us poison in silence." Mira's eyes watered, disbelief tangled with rage. Mira said, "We called you brother." Kalen's smirk wavered, shadowed by regret he dared not admit. Kalen said, "Better a traitor than a corpse chained to prophecy." Rowan leaned on his staff, eyes hollow with the weight of knowing. Rowan said, "I warned you, masks often wear smiles." Elara raised her sword, her voice steady though her pulse screamed. Elara said, "Then you stand against us, Kalen, and you will fall by the trust you murdered." The chapel's stained glass shattered as if echoing her words, moonlight piercing the dark. A cavern deep beneath the castle trembled with echoes of loss as Varen's voice filled the stone. Varen said, "Do you think me villain for seeking what was mine? I was betrayed before your kingdom breathed." His eyes burned with grief carved into cruelty. Elara stepped forward, shadows trembling around her feet. Elara said, "Pain does not excuse the ruin you weave." Varen's hand hovered over a black crown etched in runes, and the cavern groaned like a wounded beast. Varen said, "My child was taken, my throne denied, my name cursed to silence." Rowan's face fell as if old scars bled anew. Rowan said, "Tragedy is a seed, but you chose to grow thorns instead of bread." Varen's gaze cracked for one fleeting moment, sorrow breaking beneath rage. Varen said, "I will not lose again." The cavern's walls pulsed, stone veins glowing like broken hearts. In the courtyard, under bruised twilight, Elara faced Adrian with breath sharp in her chest. Adrian's hand trembled as he gripped her arm, truth spilling. Adrian said, "I should have told you sooner, the curse binds me too." Elara froze, betrayal and anguish twisting inside. Elara said, "You bore this alone while I bled for answers." Adrian's jaw clenched, shame cutting through his steady eyes. Adrian said, "I feared you would see me as chain, not ally." Mira stepped forward, voice shaking with fear and compassion. Mira said, "Secrets rot love faster than curses." The fountain stilled, water flat as glass, listening to their hearts fracture. Rowan turned away, unable to witness the breaking. Elara lifted her chin, anger mixing with grief. Elara said, "Then prophecy is not my burden alone, and your silence is the sharpest wound." Twilight deepened, and their bond cracked. The library doors groaned open as Elara pressed her wrist to the sigil-carved lock. Shelves shuddered, revealing a mirror veined with silver fire. The mirror's surface rippled, showing not her reflection, but a child crowned in moonlight. Elara said, Who are you? The mirror voice echoed. The voice said, You are me, the blood they erased. Rowan staggered back, staff rattling against stone. Rowan said, The truth was hidden to keep you alive. Elara's pulse thundered as the mirror cracked and reformed, showing wars and sacrifices chained to her name. Elara said, Then I am the curse, not just its victim. The mirror flared, spilling light that seared her eyes with memory. Adrian whispered, grief-breaking. Adrian said, You were never the curse, only the promise of freedom twisted. The mirror shrieked and split, smoke pouring out like broken prophecy. The battlefield's edge was lit with stormlight as Rowan lowered himself to the ground, body trembling. Rowan said, This path was always meant to outlive me. Elara reached for him, panic striking deeper than any blade. Elara said, No, your wisdom is not spent, it is needed. Rowan smiled faintly, eyes fading like embers. Rowan said, Wisdom is seed, not root, it must grow in you now. Adrian knelt beside them, jaw clenched against grief. Adrian said, We are not ready to lose you. Rowan gripped Elara's hand with surprising strength, runes flaring one last time. Rowan said, You are ready, even if your heart denies it. Mira's tears cut streaks through the dirt on her cheeks. Mira said, Don't leave us when the night is thickest. Rowan exhaled, staff splintering into light, body collapsing into dust. The storm answered with thunder, and silence carved the battlefield hollow. The kingdom burned as crimson twilight bled across shattered towers, smoke rising like prayers unanswered. Elara stood at the ramparts, the cries of villagers beneath her cutting deeper than any blade. Elara said, Their voices carry louder than prophecy. Adrian gripped the parapet beside her, jaw locked as if stone might answer his fury. Adrian said, The curse spreads faster than soldiers can march. Mira stumbled forward, cloak torn, soot on her cheeks. Mira said, Homes collapse before we can reach them. Varen's laughter carried faintly from the horizon, thunder beneath fire. Varen said, Let them choke on hope. Elara's eyes burned with grief, guilt crushing her lungs. Elara said, I will not watch them suffer as ghosts of my blood did. Ash fell like snow as the kingdom bent under the weight of ruin, and the night prepared to claim the rest. In the hall of cracked banners, Elara knelt, blade trembling in her hand, shadows pressing closer like hounds. Elara said, Perhaps destiny chose wrongly, for I am hollow. Adrian crouched before her, eyes blazing with defiance. Adrian said, If hollow, then I will fill you with my strength. Mira leaned on the broken column, voice sharp with fierce loyalty. Mira said, You've carried us, let us carry you. Kaelin emerged from the shadows, smirk curdled into bitterness. Kaelin said, Strength is a lie when death waits at every door. Elara lifted her face, tears gleaming, shame and resolve warring. Elara said, I fear I cannot carry the kingdom's weight. Adrian gripped her shoulders like an anchor. Adrian said, Then let it break us together, not you alone. The banners shivered, as if stirred by unseen breath. The courtyard echoed with clash as Mira staggered, blood at her temple, facing two armored wraiths. Mira said, Not yet, my breath still burns. Elara charged forward, blade catching moonlight, defiance etched in every step. Elara said, You will not take her. Adrian cut down a wraith, his voice like iron shattering glass. Adrian said, Stay with us, Mira. Mira's knees buckled, but her smile flickered through the pain. Mira said, Better to fall fighting for her than hide in fear. Rowan's voice whispered in memory, urging strength, though his body was gone. Elara's eyes welled, heart cracking at the sight of her friend collapsing. Elara said, No curse will claim you while I draw breath. The wraiths dissolved into ash, but Mira's body faltered against Elara's arms, fragile as glass. On the cliff edge beneath storm clouds, the silver stag reappeared, antlers blazing with starlight. Elian said, Time wanes, the curse devour faster than hope. Elara stepped closer, desperation raw. Elara said, Tell me how to end it. Elian lowered his head, voice a growl of prophecy. Elian said, the blood you deny must awaken, but the price is comfort itself. Adrian's jaw tightened, hand instinctively reaching for Ilaris. Adrian said, if comfort must die, let it die in me. The stag's eyes burned, indifferent yet ancient. Elian said, sacrifice cannot be shared, only borne. Mira limped forward, defiant though pale. Mira said, then no sacrifice is hers alone, not while I breathe. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolling across the cliffs as destiny sharpened its blade. In the throne room swallowed by shadow, Varen stood crowned in living darkness, his form half man, half curse. Varen said, at last the throne remembers its master. Ilara's chest tightened, fury smoldering. Ilara said, you sit on ashes, not a kingdom. Adrian raised his blade, sparks of steel catching what little light remained. Adrian said, this ends tonight. Mira steadied herself, dagger gleaming though her arm shook. Mira said, we bleed but we still stand. Varen's laughter cracked the walls like thunder. Varen said, stand or fall, all serve me in death. Ilara's wrist burned, sigil flaring, her pulse uniting with the kingdom's cry. Ilara said, then I will burn the curse, even if it burns me too. Darkness writhed as the throne itself trembled under the weight of their defiance. The gates of the cursed citadel loomed black against the storm-split sky as Ilara gathered her allies. Her chest heaved with both fear and resolve, the kingdom's final breath resting on her shoulders. Ilara said, this night decides not just our fate, but every life that clings to hope. Adrian placed his hand on her shoulder, firm as iron. Adrian said, you are not alone, nor will you ever be again. Mira gripped her dagger, her voice fierce though her frame trembled. Mira said, I would rather fall here than see you fall without me. Elian's silver antlers shimmered faintly, casting starlight upon the broken stones. Elian said, courage is a spark, let it burn into fire. The wind carried Varen's laughter from the high walls, bitter and unyielding. Varen said, enter if you dare, your courage will be your shroud. The storm cracked open above, lightning carving jagged light upon their faces, and Ilara stepped forward. Inside the throne hall, shadows rippled alive across cracked marble, and Varen descended from his seat of ruin. His voice was low, venom wrapped in sorrow. Varen said, do you see what mercy cost me? Everything stolen, everything denied. Ilara's hand tightened on her blade as her pulse thundered in her ears. Ilara said, your grief does not crown you, only your cruelty does. Adrian stepped in front of her, steel singing from scabbard. Adrian said, we end this tonight, whatever the cost. Varen's eyes flared with power, shadow tendrils licking the pillars like fire. Varen said, then drown in the curse that made me. Mira's cry cut through the tension, fierce as ever. Mira said, we've bled too long to bow now. The air grew heavy, stone groaning, as if the hall itself resisted the curse. Ilara lifted her chin, eyes blazing. Ilara said, then the curse will break on my blood, not rule it. The clash erupted like thunder as Adrian lunged, his sword colliding with Varen's crown of shadows. Sparks leapt, steel screaming against darkness. Adrian said, I'll carve the curse from you, if I must. Varen snarled, power writhing from his hands. Varen said, you cannot carve grief, it multiplies when cut. Mira darted past, striking with speed, her dagger slicing through a tendril. Mira said, then we'll cut until nothing remains. Ilara pressed forward, wrist sigil blazing with light brighter than torches. Ilara said, if you built a throne from loss, then I'll shatter it with truth. The shadows shrieked as if alive, recoiling from her touch. Elian's voice boomed from the hall's entrance, ancient and unyielding. Elian said, the curse cannot bind light that accepts itself. Ilara's breath caught, understanding pressing sharp against her chest as destiny ignited. The hole cracked as lightning split the ceiling, pouring rain into fire and shadow alike. Adrian stumbled, struck hard, blood streaking his cheek. Elara cried out, rushing to him. Elara said, "Stay with me, you cannot fall now." Adrian's grip tightened on her wrist despite his pain. Adrian said, "If I fall, let my strength carry you through." Varen roared, shadows twisting into blades that rained from the air. Mira dove, knocking Elara aside, her own arm catching a cut. Mira said, "Better me than you." Elara's heart broke as crimson stained Mira's sleeve. Varen's voice thundered. Varen said, "Every sacrifice strengthens me." Alien's antlers flared, blasting shadows back, starlight searing into the curse. Alien said, "Sacrifice gives birth to victory when bound to truth." Elara's tears burned, resolve hardening sharper than her blade. Elara said, "Then my truth will end this." Elara rose from the broken marble, blade trembling with light as the sigil consumed her wrist, fire and moonlight spiraling up her arm. Elara said, "If blood is the curse's demand, then let mine burn it away." Varen staggered, disbelief twisting his face as cracks split his shadowed crown. Varen said, "No, your blood cannot free what was forged in grief." Adrian forced himself upright, voice hoarse but unwavering. Adrian said, "Her blood is not grief, it is hope." Mira's voice rang, fierce and steady despite her pain. Mira said, "And hope is stronger than your throne of ashes." Elara thrust her blade into the heart of the darkness, the sigil blazing brighter than the storm outside. Shadows screamed, unraveling into dust, and the crown shattered into sparks that died in rain. The hall shook, but for the first time silence carried promise, not despair. The storm quieted, and dawn spilled pale gold over the broken citadel. Elara stood among ruins, blade lowered, her breath steady for the first time. Elara said, "The curse has ended, but so much has been lost." Adrian steadied himself beside her, blood drying on his face, strength returning. Adrian said, "Loss carves grief, yet survival carves hope." Mira leaned against a pillar, exhausted but alive, her smile faint. Mira said, "We are still standing, and that matters more than crowns." Silence settled, but it no longer carried fear. It carried the beginning of something fragile. The village square filled with survivors, their eyes wide as Elara stepped forward, cloak torn but shoulders unbowed. Children clutched mothers, staring at the girl who had faced darkness. Elara said, "This kingdom is no longer chained to a curse, but its healing will need all of us." Her words carried over the crowd, trembling yet strong. Adrian stood behind her, a silent sentinel, his presence like iron forged in fire. Adrian said, "Your courage kept us alive, but unity will rebuild us." Mira held a child's hand, smiling through exhaustion. Mira said, "We will plant again, laugh again, and make fear a memory." Murmurs spread through the crowd, disbelief slowly turning into fragile hope. Elion shimmered at the edge of the square, his antlers fading like stars into daylight. Alien said, "Balance has returned. What you build now will decide if it lasts." Elara bowed her head, grief and hope interwoven as the kingdom breathed again. By Rowan's memorial stone carved hastily from broken marble, the group gathered in silence. Elara pressed her hand against the cold surface, tears slipping unbidden. Elara said, "You taught me truth even when it broke me, and I will carry it further than you dreamed." Adrian stood beside her, his voice softer than battle ever allowed. Adrian said, "Your wisdom did not die, it lives in us now." Mira placed a flower on the stone, her smile bittersweet. Mira said, "You saved us even when you were gone, and I hope you rest knowing we fight still." The wind stirred faintly, as if Rowan's staff tapped once more against stone, echoing in memory. Alien lowered his head, antlers shimmering with faint starlight. Alien said, "His soul walks beyond, but his courage anchors here." Elara closed her eyes, heart aching yet steadied, and whispered a vow. Elara said, "Your light will not fade, not while I breathe." In the council chamber rebuilt from ruin, Elara faced nobles and villagers alike. The walls still bore cracks, yet lanterns glowed warmly, casting light over weary faces. Elara said, "The throne is not a crown, it is a promise. I will not rule as my ancestors did, with silence and fear." Adrian stood at her side, steady as stone, his voice firm. Adrian said, "Her promise is not hers alone, it belongs to all who fought and survived." Mira leaned forward, her voice sharp with truth. Mira said, "If this kingdom is to stand, then it must remember every scar and every sacrifice." Murmurs rose, hesitant but growing, as unity sparked among them. A child in the back whispered, "She saved us," and the whisper spread into a chant. Elara's chest swelled with emotion, tears brimming yet held back. Elara said, "Then let us rebuild together, for our strength is not prophecy, it is choice." That night, the stars burned brighter than they had in generations. Elara stood alone at the balcony, cloak flowing in the cool breeze, her blade resting at her side. Elara said, "The curse is gone, yet its shadow lingers in me." Adrian joined her, silent, his hand brushing hers with quiet promise. Adrian said, "Shadows only prove the stars are brighter." Mira's laughter echoed faintly below as she taught children a song of courage. Alien appeared on the far hill, antlers glowing once before fading into mist. Elara raised her gaze to the sky, heart heavy yet lightened by hope. Elara said, "If tomorrow brings trials, we will meet them together." A shooting star streaked across the heavens, and silence lingered like a vow unbroken. The kingdom, scarred yet alive, slept beneath its first peaceful sky in years.